gentlemen, the time has come once again to discuss things.
Sat down and watched by myself, and it was the most fucking surreal experience. And I had no one to talk to, I had no one to joke around with, I had no one to roast the movie with me. I just had to sit there and let it happen to me.
And now, after his torture, he's been unleashed on us all, on you especially, dear listener. For once he is risen from the grave and his tomb, there will be no hunger from the Matty. Ah! Hello, everyone. I am a geek for fun, and welcome to the last episode of Ghouly Gentlemen Horror Month. And we're doing probably the scariest topic of them all. We've had serial killers, we've had vampires, we've had sexy corpses, but most of all, today we're going to be talking about badly managed studio executives and their properties. Our topic this evening will be the Dark Universe.
Woo! Hang on, I gotta take a drink.
Take a shot every time we say bad.
Take a shot every time. But rising this creature from the grave takes a lot of energy and a lot of effort. So while he was busy doing this last time, I need to know, Steve, on God's earth, why? Just why?
There are a lot of reasons why. So there was this day. I was in college. This was 2014. It was my sophomore year, I think. And when I was in college, specifically like my freshman and sophomore year, I had fuck all to do. Like, literally, I had nothing to do. I had no friends. I had no roommate. I had nothing. I had priority registration, which meant that I could stack all my classes. So I was, from like Monday to Wednesday, I had like 5 classes. And then fucking nothing for like 4 days, you know, just so fucking bored. So I went to the movie theater back when you could still do that. And this was also before you had to like buy assigned seating online. So, you know, like really, really old school at this point, half a decade ago. So I went to the movie theater and I bought a ticket for, I want to say I bought a ticket for Fury, and I watched it. And then I theater hopped and I watched The Judge with Robert Downey Jr. Then I theater hopped again and I watched Dracula Untold. So I literally spent like 9 hours in the movie theater and paid for one movie. And thank fucking God it wasn't Dracula Untold.
Oh, Lord.
Oh my God. I picked this because for the longest time, I really, really didn't understand why everyone thought Dracula Untold was like the worst Dracula movie of all time. Because it's still not. Like, it's not a good movie. It's bizarre in so many ways, but I really didn't think it was that terrible. And I was super hyped for the idea that Universal's were bringing their monster movies back because I grew up on that shit. And then they fumbled it, and they fumbled it so bad. I don't even know how to like put it into a quip. Like, it's just so bad.
It's funny too, because it's really interesting to compare this to something like the DCEU, because I would argue, and I think you guys would probably agree, that DC, in terms of the first couple movies that came out with that, they fumbled those up too. Man of Steel and BVS are not good films, but they have the brand recognition to get butts in seats and to turn a profit regardless. So it gets to continue to limp along. Whereas with this, it's like, not only did you make 2 mediocre to shitty movies, you also honestly just don't have the brand power of Superman or Batman to even manage to get people in the theater despite how bad the movies are. So it just dead on arrival, basically.
See, what I find is...
things...
Go ahead, Steve.
And I was just gonna say it's one of those things where like almost like Fantastic, where it's not only that they didn't have the brand power to keep up the interest, but the movies that came out were so fucking bad that it nearly killed these brands. Like, who the fuck wants to make a mummy movie now? Like now, after that, who wants to make a sequel to Dracula Untold? Actually, I kind of do.
I'd see it. I'd watch it.
I have an idea for that now that I say that out loud, but you know what I mean.
That'll be a fun thing. I actually was thinking of going to that as we get closer to the end of like how we fix it. But what I think is the key difference there is I'd actually argue, and I don't have numbers on this, but just as a big fan of both and as a consumer of both, I think I can argue this. I think Dracula, especially now, is a bigger ticket seller than Superman. I think that's just probably no one thinks Dracula's not cool. No, when people don't have arguments of studio executives is we don't know how to make Dracula relevant. They fucking know how to make Dracula relevant. That's not the issue. What I think was the thing that happened with the DCU and kind of what saved it is they had one Superman film that came out that when it came out it just completely split people. Like it wasn't just this was a bad film. It's like this was the start of the wars that we're still having. Is for a group of people that film did hit something for someone and it made them passionately defend it. And then they didn't just make a bad Batman film. They made a bad DC film, but it's also the film that has Wonder Woman in it for the first time and Batman and Superman meeting each other for the first time and all these other characters on big screen for the first time. So I think the thing that kept it that extra bit of life is, yes, BVS didn't achieve what it should have, but it still made quite a bit of money because of the fact of it was such a landmark event that even if it was garbage, people were still going to go and see it just for the novelty, right. Just for the fact that all these things were in this film. We had Dracula, who is without a doubt their biggest name, even though Frankenstein and the Wolfman are all known. It's Dracula's the one, especially when vampires are in vogue, he's the guy that gets people there. And they didn't just do the sequel of Dracula meets Frankenstein, which probably would have made enough money even if it sucked. They did The Mummy, which had multiple films prior to that also had massively diminishing returns. So I think that had a lot playing to it. I think the DCEU, as bad as it was to rush straight into it, kind of gave it that extra shot in the arm to keep going and then find good stuff. Because that's what kind of happened with this as well, is this didn't totally end because a film did come out after The Mummy called The Invisible Man, and that got really good reviews and praise. Which is in this continuity, at least at that time.
Well, and I think the other thing is, with the DC example, DC tries so hard to be like Marvel that after Man of Steel came out, regardless of the reviews for it, they knew they had to keep going. And so you didn't just have Batman versus Superman come out, and then there wasn't a pause. There was a pause between Man of Steel and BVS, but then it was immediately BVS, Suicide Squad, Justice League, all within a year of each other. So all of these things were happening at the same time, and DC basically adopted the mentality of, we're going to throw all of our money into this no matter what, and eventually it's going to work. The Universal Monsters, one, I just don't think Universal's the kind of studio that's ever done that in their entire history. But also, they didn't make enough money on Dracula Untold to put the risk in of say, okay, let's go ahead and just start filming 3 movies at the same time. And then even if the next 2 are bad, the third one will show up, and there suddenly it becomes a stream of revenue, and you have to keep making them, and it justifies the costs. They waited for 3 fucking years after Dracula Untold. The Mummy came out. Before The Mummy came out, they're like, okay, Dracula Untold is no longer part of this brand we've made up because no one liked it, and so we're starting fresh with The Mummy. And then The Mummy came out, and no one fucking liked The Mummy either. And so they didn't have the corporate justification of, okay, there's still more movies coming out, so we can't afford to abandon it just because no one liked it. And so they had to just kind of scrap it. And the Invisible Man movie we got is nowhere near the Invisible Man movie they pitched in 2015 or 16, whenever they cast Johnny Depp. But that is not the movie we got. Like, it's not even close to that script. I think basically what they did is like they had a movie and they threw out the entire thing and they just gave it to Blumhouse, and Blumhouse made their own thing. I don't even think there was any like involvement with Orci and Kurtzman or anything like that. I don't even think that Invisible Man has Dark Universe in front of it.
No, I don't think it does either. And I mean, it's kind of like when you go from like, it's I don't know how similar it is, but I guess in a way it's almost similar to like when you had like Cloverfield, and then you had 10 Cloverfield Lane, and then you had a third film that was kind of in this weird pseudo universe where we were kind of using the Cloverfield name to basically sell these kind of very disparate sorts of horror and science fiction type stories. And so I wonder if that's what this whole dark universe is going to be, if it's going to be these films more like The Invisible Man, which I feel like, on the one hand, I would like to see more big budget movies based around characters like Dracula and Frankenstein and things like that. But I would, prefer they not be in the same vein as Dracula Untold and The Mummy, because frankly, those were both just so painful to sit through. And for me, it's frustrating because I think that this idea of doing a shared universe for all these classic Universal monsters, I think that's a really, really cool idea, and I think that's actually has a lot of legs. And I think it could be something interesting. But it's weird how little these first two movies. The Mummy almost kind of reminds me of Iron Man 2 in a lot of ways. It spends like so much time setting up what's clearly supposed to be the kind of backdrop for this shared universe, with Russell Crowe's character being in charge of this whole group of people. And so The Mummy's odd to me because it spends like Dracula Untold spends almost no time doing anything for the shared universe aspect of this, because there were reshoots for that. And then The Mummy spends so much of its time setting up stuff that I'm sure was meant to be for the shared universe. And I mean, I guess it's kind of unfortunate that they didn't go anywhere, but I wouldn't have wanted to see the universe continue in the shape it was in.
I mean, I agree with that. The Mummy, I mean, it's like I said earlier, it poisoned the brand so hard. Like, I don't want to see anything with any of these people ever again after that movie sometimes, Like,
Mm-hmm.
I enjoy Russell Crowe. I think he's a fun actor. I am really hyped about Shane Black doing another Nice Guys movie. But after watching The Mummy again a couple days ago, if I ever see Russell Crowe again, it'll be too soon.
Oh, I know. And it's so funny to me how they take time away from the story to be like, okay, now he's got to fight Hyde. Now this is going to happen. You're gonna watch him fight Mr. Hyde, and then he fights him, and it's just like, okay, now back to the plot.
Also, your Mr. Hyde design, can I just say that is like 20 years outdated at this point? Like, wow, are we really back to Van Helsing territory here?
Mm-hmm.
I think that goes for everyone. I think everyone's does. I would have hated to see what they did with Frankenstein, because I hate how Dracula looks. I hate how all the vampires look. I hate how the mummies look as well. Like, everyone looks garbage.
I like the way the mummies move. I mean, they've got that whole herky jerk, kind of nature to them. It's weird though, because this movie is, because there have been previous Mummy films in the past, so I think what makes this one a little bit more interesting to me, because obviously there have been Dracula films in the past, but this one, more than those, feels like it's straight up just trying to do the kind of a remake reboot of the Brendan Fraser Mummy, because it even has that very similar tone of the Brendan Fraser Mummy, where we're dealing with all this horrific imagery, but we're keeping this like extraordinarily kind of upbeat tone where everyone's joking around and things like that. So this one's interesting to me because while I probably hate The Mummy way more than I hate Dracula Untold, I do at least find it interesting to compare it to the original Mummy, which is a movie that I don't hold in amazingly high regard, but I would have much rather seen a fucking shared universe spin-off of that movie than this one.
And that's what I think is interesting about the approach to those two things, right? Is when you look at it, it's so much of the screams it's like studio exec pitch, because you immediately know if like, okay, we're doing Dracula, we're doing Mummy, So the first thing they think of when it's Dracula is like, oh yeah, Dracula. Oh, I know a fact that no one else knows because I'm the smart studio executive. He was really Vlad the Impaler, if you didn't know. I saw that movie. It even said Bram Stoker's Dracula on it, so that means it must be true. So that they've got that in their mind. It's like, okay, so that's that. So wow, we should do the origin story of Dracula. Because that's what all the origin stories, that's all of the first movie. So like, they've got that factoid, and that's how they make the origin story of Dracula. There was no, and this sounds really in bad faith, but like, I imagine I'm probably saying this in good faith compared to what actually happened. It's probably even more lifeless and sterile in terms of the execution of this. But like what happened was like, okay, so we've got that. We'll make Dracula. Like what happened with the last Dracula film that made money? Oh, he was sympathetic. So now we're just gonna make him a good guy, just like completely. Like he's got kids. He's hanging on the bed with his kids, and he's a little giggle. He's Dracula. It's so surreal to me. So we've got that. It's just like Bram Stoker writing, he was nothing but pure evil. It's like a flashback. Oh, he wasn't pure evil. He was alright before he went to, So we got that going on. It's like, okay, so that's Dracula, and we'll have like the whole thing, and then we'll set it up. Dracula's our boy. He'll be our Tony Stark. And then we get to the Mummy. Like, well, fuck. What does anyone know about the Mummy? Oh, we watched the Brandon Fraser movie. Alright, fucking that one. But you can see it, right? It's like no one had a pitch here. They were just looking at what had been done previously. More so in the... Again, this does feel very... Like, we're comparing DCU, but like I think the biggest influence on this, and at this time period, and I think we've finally started to move away from it. But like at this time, everyone was MCU crazy. Everyone was chasing that MCU dragon. Everyone wanted to get a taste of that MCU money. It was changing. A universe was opening up everywhere. So this is very much trying to capitalize on Iron Man 1 and Iron Man 2 as what they were trying to build up. They weren't following the DCU model and that they were going to do like team up straight away. They were very much like, oh, we'll just do what MCU did, like verbatim. Which again is kind of what the MonsterVerse movies were doing with like Godzilla and then King Kong, and then building up to sequels with like them all together, making that the event rather than trying to rush it to catch up. So that's interesting, but I also almost think like because the novelty of Dracula meeting Frankenstein or Dracula meeting the Wolfman or Hyde is like, it's kind of there, but it's kind of not. Because I think we as a culture, and especially like nerdy side of things, most fantasy shit has all of those guys just hanging around together anyway. Like, if you play like a fantasy board game and it has Dracula, it's gonna have werewolves in it as well. It's gonna have fucking split personality doctors, even if they're not called Van Helsing or Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. It's them. It's the pastiches of them. It's gonna have a Frankenstein. It's like there's not as much of a cultural desire, I think, to see these things like combine, because we've already kind of associated them with, oh, they all exist in the supernatural vogue. Whereas with like the MCU and like the thing that really got people coming for the post-credit scenes for that one was like, oh yeah, but who's going to come next? And that's what keeps going on, is people are so excited to see this character that they've really wanted to see on the screen for the first time, or meet these characters for the first time. It's how they sold the Spider-Man film and stuff like that. And even the DCU had that going for it. I was like, I would really like to see Superman meet Batman. The Universal ones is like, well, if I wanted to see that, they made those films back when it was still the original actors as well. From like Bela Lugosi, and if I wanted to see Boris Karloff fight against the Wolfman, I can watch that film. It was made. So that's something I think is probably why pop culture as a large thing didn't kind of get hyped for this. I don't know. Do you guys think that's got any merit to it? Like the cultural, the fact that so many of these characters are public domain, the fact that so many characters have showed in other ways.
I think what's important to remember with that too, because you're right, it is the Marvel comparison. When they did the press release for Dark Universe, they like aped that shit straight from Disney's playbook. They even said that the do they ever get a name for the guy that turns Dracula into a vampire? Legitimately, I saw this movie like a day ago, and I can hardly remember what happened.
Fucking Tywin Lannister. Yeah, there
Yeah,
we go. Tywin
yeah.
Lannister.
Yeah, so Lannister is supposed to be like the Nick Fury of this universe, and they literally say that. I think every time the studios want to ape the MCU, and they always say that they're doing that, or they're at least like paying homage to it in a really particular way, they forget something really fundamental that I think is very easy to forget if you didn't read comic books before the MCU, which is no one fucking knew who the Avengers were. No one gave a shit about Iron Man. Okay, like Iron Man got announced as a film by Marvel Studios before, at a point in Marvel's history where Iron Man didn't even have a fucking book that was monthly. He didn't have anything. Like there was Iron Man Volume 3 with God, I can't remember his name anymore. Len Kaminsky? Is it Len Kaminsky? But like there was the 90s Iron Man Volume 3 that ran for like 80 something issues. That got canceled. And then there was this period of time between Iron Man Volume 3 and Volume 4 where there was no Iron Man book until we started doing Extremis. And then later when Matt Fraction showed up with the MCU stuff and Invincible Iron Man. Iron Man was a C-list character that no one gave a shit about. And then Marvel's like, okay, we're gonna give him a movie. And then all the MCU characters kind of come from that same sort of mold of, okay, no one has any preconceived notions about any of these people. None of these are remakes, except for with the exception of Captain America, but that doesn't really count because no one saw those movies. None of these characters have like cultural nostalgia or ingrained old franchises we're pulling from. So you just stack them one by one after one, and then you bring them all together after people already fall in love with them. You're doing a lot of the hard work for the audience because there's just like nothing for them to latch onto to begin with. It's really, really hard to get an understanding of Iron Man now with the absence of Robert Downey Jr. because he made that role for the general public. And Downey didn't really need to have to do any research into the comic book Tony Stark because no one fucking read the comic book Tony Stark. So he could just do whatever the hell he wanted. No one was going to complain. Who was he worried about? Me with my fucking 300 Iron Man comics? Like I was going to review bomb his movie? So you get a lot of progress with that only. And when you start looking at these things like the Universal monsters that have been around for hundreds of fucking years at this point, that people grew up with, that people associate in crossovers already, like the original superhero crossover movie was Freddy versus Jason, you know? As far as like the modern version of these characters go. And the Universal monsters have been running around doing this for like 10, 20 years in like the 40s, 50s, and 60s. And so you don't have to do this thing of, okay, let's individualize each one of these characters. If you want to do a dark universe, just make a movie that's called Dark Universe and bring them all together already. Like, no one's starved for knowledge on who Dracula is, or who Frankenstein is, or who the Wolfman is. Like, it doesn't take the same kind of work that any of these things need. And I think DC sort of runs into the same problem, which is neither here nor there, but like they had to reintroduce Superman to the world, which gave them a lot of problems they didn't have to have because now they had to justify this version of Superman, when really all you should have just said is, all right, Justice League. Like the Avengers have a much easier time with this than anyone else on the planet, and they deliberately screwed it up by trying to do the individual Marvel approach as if Superman was as obscure as Iron Man prior to a movie when he wasn't. The same thing with Dracula. Like, you don't... Like, the title alone, right? Dracula Untold. Dracula's been told thousands of times. There is nothing untold about Dracula here. It's a flawed premise from the beginning.
I think there's also... I think that actually plays into another role in this, which is I think we should talk about the effectiveness of Dark Universe as a brand. I mean, you look at Iron Man, you look at First Avenger, you look at Thor, and they all have this very consistent Marvel Studios Iron Man, Marvel Studios Captain America, Marvel Studios Thor. You get to Dracula Untold and The Mummy, even looking at the theatrical posters. There's no consistent branding. There's nothing to communicate to you visually or anything that these two are in the same universe because, you know, you're right. We're living in a post-MCU world. The idea of two films being in the same universe of each other while not being direct sequels to each other, that is enough for at least some people to kind of garner that extra interest. But how well was it branded that these two things were together? You know, with The Mummy, the Brendan Fraser films were exceedingly popular. So when The Mummy comes out, everyone's like, oh, they're rebooting the Brendan Fraser movie, or like, oh, does this have to do with those movies? There's no talk of like, oh, this is in the same universe as that Dracula movie. That's awesome, because that movie came out so long ago and was basically like fucking retconned into this universe almost, from what I can tell. So there's no consistent branding to effectively communicate to people that these two things are the beginning of a shared universe. So I'm curious how many people didn't even fucking know, because that's a problem in and of itself. You know, you can make the best shared universe films of all time, but if you don't communicate that to your audience in a way that gets people into the theaters, you've put in all that effort for nothing. Now, luckily, they didn't, but, you know.
Do either of you guys remember the trailer for The Mummy when that came out?
No, I don't.
Okay, because you're right, and that's the weirdest fucking thing about the Mummy trailers. Because you mentioned that the Mummy is a lot like Iron Man 2, and that they didn't have consistent branding. If you watch those trailers, that trailer plays like it's a sequel to a movie that already came out called The Mummy, where, like, they shoot everything as if you're supposed to know who these people are, and, like, when Russell Crowe shows up in the trailer, it's like a reveal. Like, we're supposed to know he's Mr. Jekyll and Dr. Hyde, and we've seen him already, even though we've never seen him before. It's so bizarre. It's like it's trying to skip a step.
Interesting. Like they're trying to sell you on the hype for something that isn't even a thing yet.
Yeah, it's like they're saying the brand's already there.
But they didn't put in the footwork for it. That's interesting.
They also didn't call it Dark Universe is the Mummy or something like that. They should have done that.
Exactly. Like you have to. I think we as nerds, we tend to focus on the quality of the pieces, and we tend to focus on how well they fit together. But there's a business and branding side to all this, and I think the MCU wouldn't do half as well as it did if it weren't for the consistency in branding, marketing, business, yada yada yada. Because there's plenty of mediocre to not super great MCU movies, but that has not stopped the train at all, because they've so well built that consumer audience. They've so well marketed it. They've so well, that side of it has also been handled brilliantly by Marvel. And that was one of the many things missing when they tried to do this Dark Universe experiment.
Well, it's gotten to this point where I think everything for the general audience they subsume as the Marvel Cinematic Universe, if it's even vaguely associated with like a generic superhero origin story. Like, how many times do you have conversations just in your day-to-day life where people will still like unironically ask you something like, is Superman going to show up in the next Avengers movie? Or like I legitimately, I've had this conversation with this person at work a couple of years ago when the movie first came out, but they're like, so is the Mummy set in the Marvel universe? Because they didn't.
Yes,
they didn't
the answer is yes.
Yes, the answer is absolutely yes. But they didn't comprehend that these were separate things, because these movies borrow so heavily from the thing the Marvel universe just kept doing over and over again, where it's getting to this point where the Marvel Cinematic Universe is such a default standard that everything is either a part of it or trying to be it, at which point it might as well just be part of it. And there are things that are coming out that people didn't even know were in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. They're just suspicious of everything. Like, I would not be surprised if there were people confused about, like, why is Dracula not on one of the superhero teams after that movie?
Because fucking Blade, that's why. That would be the way you open up the fucking new Blade film. If he just slits Dracula's throat. He's like, stop asking why he's not in the Avengers.
This Dracula could be in the Avengers. Like, he's more Morbius the Living Vampire than he is Dracula.
And we're getting one of those films as well, which people are confused if that's going to be in the MCU or not. It's like, it's a fucking self-repeating prophecy, man. You're right. You're 100% on the money. But the thing I find, with probably why that has failed so, like, catastrophically for this, and then when it did find success with The Invisible Man, and then pending to see if we're going to get any other thing else from, like, the Bride of Frankenstein or the Dark Army thing, which is kind of their version of the Justice League movie. So we'll see. I doubt any of those will get made, but you never know. The thing that I think is why just trying to ape the MCU for this as a concept is just inherently flawed. even getting aside the quality of the two films, just if you were going to build a cinematic universe with universal horror monsters, you do not try to copy the same way the family-friendly, Disney-owned superhero all across all brands, quippy for your parents, but also safe enough to bring your kids to franchise that is built upon TV shows and comic books and everything, all of that. You don't ape that for your fucking monster movie, which because you don't satisfy anyone. You don't satisfy the people who would want to bring children to a safe family movie that they can watch every year and have it as an event with like the MCU films, because there's going to be a fucking horrific shit in it. There's going to be blood, there's going to be violence, just as an aspect of these characters. You can't, if you take away that, you just take away what's the point of doing a Dracula film. But at the same time, if you want to bring in the horror crowd, you can't try and make superhero origins. You can't fit them into this mold. It's kind of, I think it's kind of the mistake a lot of people make who don't understand it, is they treat superhero as if it's a genre, and it's not. It's just what the career choices of characters are. Is like within superhero comics are different genres and such of like the thing is like a Daredevil story is not the same as a Thor story. Is they are completely different worlds of storytelling. The fact they are linked by a single brand is a miracle that happened, and that's just kind of the nature of how superhero comics work. When they try to apply outside things to that don't seem to understand, it's like, oh, all these characters are Marvel characters. Yeah, they're all created by Stan Lee. Oh, okay. When they try and apply it to like Dracula or the Mummy, it just doesn't come off right, because these characters are not meant to be told in that format. These characters are not meant to be portrayed as protagonists. Like, I think that is probably the key thing, is like, if you want to make Dracula your protagonist, you have to try really fucking hard. We did a whole episode on vampires, and we've gone over some of the different things, but like, Dracula shows up and shit. But if he's the protagonist, like, there's normally another character there who's your actual protag to cover how monstrous he is, or how conflicted he is, or anything. With this, and you just squarely focus it on him, with the idea of that when he'll be joining the team, other characters will act that for him, and he'll act that for other characters. It's like, maybe there's something to it, but it really doesn't. You really have to stretch the mold to imagine these characters were working in that format. Whereas, I think what made it still hasn't done as well, but what I think at least made people care about the current Godzilla vs. Kong franchise that happened, is they realized they didn't make Godzilla or King Kong fit a superhero mold, is they just did a Godzilla movie and a King Kong movie, quality of it aside, but they gave you what you wanted, but with the premise of like, yeah, and then they're gonna fucking fight, because that's what people go to those films for, to see them fight big monsters. It's like, well, now you got King Kong's gonna fight the biggest fucking monster. Like with this, probably what you want to do is just do a straight horror Dracula film, and then have the fucking stinger be like when he gets to London or some shit. There's like a museum and they've brought the mummy's tomb, and you just end it on that. It's like, whoa, fuck, Dracula's gonna have to fucking deal with that. Like, and that's where you go off from there. Like, you build the idea of like the clashes, because you're right, Steve. Freddy versus Jason kind of set the template of how you should do horror crossovers. Is if we're just going to go to horror movies and see like thrills and scares, and to see these characters interact. With superheroes, sometimes you have them fight, but mostly you want to see them banter off each other. With horror monsters, you don't want to see them kill each other.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the other thing about The Mummy that's super confusing to me, just from like a production perspective of like, okay, so we spend all of this fucking screen time on Russell Crowe doing fuck all of anything, who's supposed to be like the anchor or team leader for all of these characters that they're going to bring to film. But like, what the hell team? Like, what is this going to be just like the Avengers but monsters? Are they going to be fighting like other demons? Is it going to be like, well, Dracula and Frankenstein don't get along, but they're going to team up to take this other person down, and then the Wolfman is like the cool one? Like, what was this?
It frustrates me because Russell Crowe has this like sort of monologue at the end, Because, like, and I assume we don't give a shit about spoilers, yeah?
No.
Yeah, it's fine. I don't think anyone on the
like-
planet gives a shit about spoilers for these films, man.
It's like,
Someone out there is like, no, how dare you spoil The Mummy for me? The 2017 Mummy with Tom Cruise that no one saw.
This is the fucking
That's a fair
Snyder
point.
cut, but like for the Dark Universe, I think. It's just really small. It's like 2 people in a Facebook group.
there are dozens of us. Dozens. But no, that's like fucking like. So like it when he like. That's the other thing, because in The Mummy, they're like, oh, she made a deal with Set, the god of death. Set is not the Egyptian god of death, you fucks. Set is the god of chaos. Anubis is the god of death, you absolute fucks. But moving on, 'cause I like Egyptian mythology, but moving on, he like gets like the powers of Set. He gets like the powers of fucking life and death. He can just fucking bring people back to life and shit. And so he like goes off and he goes off to be in search of things. And then Russell Crowe, Dr. Jekyll, is like going on this speech about how he's like, oh, he's got all this power, and he could be, you know, our greatest ally, our greatest strength. So clearly they're setting up like they're gonna fucking you know, there's going to be like some crossover movie, Dark Army, where they have to find Tom Cruise's character and be like, we need your help, and pull him back to hang out with all these other people and fight something. But like, I half expected, and this is me giving the movie way too much credit, I half expected him to mention how, like, you know, he starts saying how he's going to be our greatest enemy against evil. And I'm like, oh shit, what evil? Oh shit, is he talking about like Dracula? Is like Dracula going to be the bad guy of this whole franchise? Because that would be the fucking shit. And then he just never it's so funny how it's just like this vague superhero movie MCU bullshit that means nothing because they had nothing. Like, what were you gonna do? It's like they're just going through the motions of making some big superhero team up thing. Like it feels like they didn't even have a fucking idea, that they just are like, these are the things that we need to have some kind of shared universe, and we'll just kind of find it along the way. I mean, it's so bizarre.
Well, obviously you didn't see the deleted end credit scene when we cut to the
No,
ocean.
there's a deleted end credits scene?
Yeah. Well, we cut to the ocean, and a fucking hand emerges from out the deep, and in his full glory, we see Cthulhu, and he says, "Fine, I'll do it myself," and it just fucking.
Fuck off. You know how cool that would have been?
I know. I was
You
like,
know,
I was doing it for the bit, but like when I said it, I was like, shit, that would be fucking dope.
This movie, that movie, that would have taken this from like a 0 out of 5 to like a fucking 5 out of 5, like, straight, right away. Like Cthulhu monster comes out. Oh, fuck.
It should be noted that the Dark Universe was spearheaded by Alex Kurtzman, who's one half of Ortsy and Kurtzman, and that probably explains why so much of it is half-baked.
Oh. That's very, very on point.
Like, and so I guess snide remarks aside, Ortsy and Kurtzman are really, really terrible writers when it comes to pretty much everything. But like their big problem is always they want to do the who's that fucking Doctor Who guy's name? I can't remember.
Moffat?
Moffat, yeah. They want to do the Moffat thing every single time they make anything, and they're like this perfect amalgamation between Stephen Moffat and J.J. Abrams, where they want everything to revolve around a mystery, and every time that there is a clear set of answers or clear sets of motifs, they want to turn it on their head only to return back to it in the beginning, so that it creates this sort of like, what, I don't even know, like pretentious irony or at the very end where it's like, oh, everyone's in completely different paths than when you knew when we started, but now they're all right back to where you knew them. Isn't this clever? Isn't this cute? And everything they make is always this way, where it's always this sort of like asking really obvious questions with really obvious answers that they dance around for an hour and a half, and they bring all their characters to places that they should have been to start with without giving them any sort of like real sustenance to work with. And you just get like these really half-baked movies that are better off as TV pilots, like Star Trek Into Darkness. And Kurtzman spearheaded this with the writer of the Fast and Furious movies. And if that's your recipe here. A guy whose only trick is to make obvious things seem less obvious than they are. And the guy who writes Fast and Furious, you're not going to get very far, ironically.
I'm just saying, man. If you got Dracula and a fucking, if this was all like the universe actually building up to a fucking drag race to the finish with all the monsters, like this would actually been a lot. I'm just saying, like
if Fast and Furious 9 does not have Dracula, in it,
yeah, that's how you fucking do it, man. Is you're like, we gotta remember when we defeat Dracula, the real thing we brought us on the way is family. And he's like, you got to defeat my sick drift, and he's like fucking in a coffin with wheels.
By handing him a Corona with garlic in it.
Oh man, this is the way. I'm just saying, man. There's these pictures already. It's like as stupid and as brilliant as they are. I think that's what's missing from these films. Is these films, just in general, despite how they don't want to be too serious because they don't have things, but there's no fun in these things.
Yeah,
they don't feel inspired at all. Like they don't feel like someone had this like spark of an idea. You don't sense that like imagination. You don't sense that like that singular creative vision to make something fucking awesome. You know, like or hate something like Thor Ragnarok, you at least feel the passion that Taika put into doing his take on this story. Whereas with these movies, they feel like we've talked about, they feel like fucking made by committee, you know, boardroom movies. That where's the love? Where's the passion? Where's the originality? Where's like fucking like literally anything?
And I think if you're going for something like this, I think that's your audience, right? It's the original Universal horror fans. It's the fans of not just the stories of Dracula and Frankenstein and the myths of the mummy and everything. It's not just that. If you're doing it for Universal, what people are going for are Boris Karloff, Bela Lugosi. It's that vibe. It's that era of American myth almost. That's what that's become. Is that it was such a successful and impactful thing that it really is to undersell how impactful and that changed the cinema and general just how media is consumed forever. To the fact that like those versions of the characters are normally the versions of the characters most people think of. They're the versions you see on the Muppets, the versions you see on cereal boxes or anything. Is those Universal monster versions of those characters, not necessarily what's accurate to the original source material or even the myths. So it's like, okay, if that's your thing and that's what makes your version of these monsters unique and you want to put all of them together, do that. Like, okay, so like just pretend that all of those happened. Alright, what does that look like in 2020? How do you fucking bring Bela Lugosi Dracula into 2020 and what is his reaction to the modern world and all of that shit? How do you bring the Boris Karloff Frankenstein, who had the Bride of Frankenstein and had the Son of Frankenstein, the fucking great, the descendant of Frankenstein? That's a fucking cool ass title for a film. Like, how does all of that go together? And you make that your base, you make that your cult following of the people who will ride and die for those films. And you try and get in the spirit of those as much as you can. Maybe even go all fucking way and do like the White House and just have them all in black and white as well. Like, really save a lot of money, but if that came out and was good, I guarantee it would take off because people would eat that shit up just for the novelty.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It'd be like those, those YouTube remakes of like Power Rangers or something that you see of like when it's like us 20 years later and we're doing this now, like the Pokemon ones. Like, do that for like Universal monsters. Like, make it your version. Don't try and even make it a reboot. Make them direct fucking sequels to the original films. Like, that would be nuts. Like,
you see the issue there too, because like you said, it's not like any of these people were inspired to do shit like that. That'd be really cool. That like had a passion for those old monster movies. This was entirely the Avengers had just come out. We need a cinematic universe on screen to rival this, or Disney's going to take over. Oh look, we're Universal, and this is a property we have that's already done this in the past. We're right. The original shared monster with the shared character universe. We'll just do it again. Except we'll use the new format. Like, there's no one attached to this from interviews or from production history or from family history or whatever that like gave a shit about any of those old movies. Like it's very clear that like everyone who wanted to watch these movies and came out hating them were people that were really excited for the chance to get more Dracula or get more Mummy or get more Invisible Man, and no one making the movies could give any shits about those.
It frustrates me too because that's exactly the conversation that they would have. They look at their shit and they'd be like, how does a light bulb not go off in your head when you literally look at that and be like, we were the first ones to do this. We did it first. How does a light bulb not immediately go off in your head and be like, fucking, we can make this so fucking dope? And they just don't. Like, it's frustrating because, like, I would so dig some sort of shared universe for horror. Even things like American Horror Story, it's already doing that. Like every season of that show is an anthology, but they all take place in the same universe, and there are occasional like crossovers for characters and ideas and settings and things like that. So like there's a hunger for this shared universe stuff, and there's specifically an audience for like a horror shared universe. And it's shocking to me that they didn't look at the fact that they did this first before Marvel, before any of them. And that didn't set something off. It's frustrating the like missed potential more than anything.
I think that's as well. Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I was going to say, should we mention the Invisible Man? Because we've kind of just been bashing Dracula Untold and the Mummy for an hour.
I mean, if you got anything to say on it, sure, go ahead.
Yeah, I didn't.
I don't know. I was just asking because I didn't particularly like the Invisible Man either, but
I haven't seen it. I feel bad now. I actually didn't watch it. But it looks. Yeah, that's because I think the thing that's interesting to talk about is the failure of Dracula and Mummy and like what we can like learn from that. Which should we talk about these movies on an individual basis just at all, just like for fun, because they're fucking hilarious.
I mean, you did go out of your way to watch them, so now's your time to vet, I suppose.
Okay, Dracula Untold.
Dracula's bat fist.
Jesus fucking Christ. Luke Evans, first of all, who the fuck cast Luke Evans as Dracula? I would like to know. Because anytime that Luke Evans stands there and is like, my name is, like, at the end of the movie when he's like, my name is Dracula, I'm just like, I cringe so hard because, like, you did not earn this. Like, this movie does not have the confidence in itself to fucking earn that shit. And Luke Evans is a weird casting choice. But it's interesting to me how much they wanted to make this kind of like a big, epic superhero action movie. I mean, like, he becomes a vampire, and not 5 minutes later, he literally solos an army of, like, several thousand dudes, right? And then he bat bends. Like, if you've seen Avatar: The Last Airbender, like, fucking earth bending and fire bending and shit, he does that, but with a swarm of bats that form a fucking fist.
Tell me that's not legitimately cool, though.
That shit. No, he's, like, fucking standing on top of a castle, and he's doing, like, fucking... He's, like, pulling his fist back, and then he's like he's, like, fucking airbending or some shit, and then, like, the group of bats forms a fist and then just slams into the army. And I tell you, if the whole movie had that energy, like, if we were there the whole time, I'd be fucking singing its praises to the moon and back. Because, yeah, there's, like, Dracula, I'll at least say over the Mummy, there are things to enjoy in it over the Mummy, I feel like.
I think the big distinction between Dracula Untold and the Mummy is Dracula Untold is a forgettable movie that's not very good, but at least it's not boring. The Mummy is just grating to watch second to second to second. Dracula Untold, like, watching it in the theater blew by pretty quick, and I had a decent enough time, and then I forgot everything about it, and hadn't watched it again for 6 fucking years until we decided to do this video. And I watched it like a day ago, and I can't remember anything about it again. But I don't remember being, like, annoyed while I was sitting through it. My biggest thing with that is that Dominic Cooper is having a lot of fun, and is clearly the only person in this entire studio having any fun with any of these movies. And that's kind of infectious and fun to watch. The bat bending is the craziest shit I've ever seen, and I fucking love it. Like, I want that in a Dracula movie forever now. That's a staple of the concept now. It's so fucking funny. And Luke Evans, like, he's not good in this movie. I think he has the potential to be a pretty decent Dracula. The problem is you cast a guy whose entire range includes playing tough guy who walks around in the background and shows up at the end to menace you as the lead in a film, and it just doesn't work. Like, he just does not have the range or the material even to like carry an entire 2-hour origin story that's trying to be tragic with any sort of like emotional depth to it. So it's just hard to pay attention to anything involving him in the movie, except when it's going batshit crazy and doesn't make any sense, pun intended. But then you contrast that with The Mummy, and The Mummy is just like a big budget, star-studded, completely miserable experience from beginning to end. Like, I don't like Tom Cruise, but you are above this. Tom Cruise is above this, isn't he?
Yeah. Oh no, he is. I'm not a Tom Cruise guy either, but I do love me them Mission Impossible films, and I'm like, at least those are fucking fun.
He didn't almost drown in Mission Impossible to be remembered for this.
Exactly, and like, it's frustrating too, because like I said, with The Mummy, it feels like we're deliberately very much like our heads are with the Brendan Fraser film. We've got that same sort of action comedy tone, and we're like, oh, but this time it's a sexy girl mummy. Oh man, and like that's fine. That's whatever. Like, you can do that. Like, I don't give a shit. I mean, maybe get the Egyptian god of death's name right, but other than that, I mean, that's fine. But then like just fucking it's. And even just on like a superficial level, it's just like the original Mummy film is this like period piece adventure film inspired by Indiana Jones that's like all throughout Egypt and like super fun. It's not great, but it's fun. And then this movie's just like, we find the mummy, and then the rest of the movie takes place in fucking London, because that's exciting. And it's just, it's so fucking like, even if I didn't hate everything about this movie, just the plot of it is fucking dull as shit. The only thing I enjoyed about it was when I realized that the comedic side character was Peter B. Parker from Spider-Verse, and I was just like, oh, that's kind of fun. That was like the one thing I had to hold on to in this entire miserable ride of an experience.
I find that whenever I'm depressed, I think of Spider-Verse too, Matt. So that's okay. Yeah, it's one of those things, right, where like, I think again, it just comes back to is like, you guys are universal, and you're basing yourself like the universal horror monsters, and that's your whole vibe. And you're basing both of your things off two films that came out previously that did wildly different takes from what versions you're trying to promise people of coming together, because those were just the ones that made money, and those were the ones people know. Very pointedly, like you would not do a Dracula origin film if the Francis Ford Coppola Dracula film came out. You just wouldn't. You wouldn't do an action adventure mummy movie. Again, you watch the original, like the Universal, fucking 1940s, 1950s, 1960s, whatever, the old one, I should say. You watch the original mummy film, and it's like this really slow, somber, introspective take on like the meaning of life and death, and like life after death, and like the hubris of like these fucking scientists who like get themselves killed because they're playing with matters that they don't understand. Like, the mummy itself isn't really, I mean, it's not even the bandages mummy. It is just a straight up pharaoh who is just like kind of just minding their own business, wanting to get peace with the reincarnation. But these fucking scientists keep poking the bear. So that's like really interesting, especially as we do deal with more and more as science has improved, like the introspection to the supernatural, the idea of disturbing the dead, and the fact that again it is still so common to undig tombs and just put them in museums and shit like that. That is not a, like, how different, and cultural insensitivity, like all these themes of like, imperialism shit, they're not gone away. They're not any less relevant. They're only getting more relevant of like what you can play with. And at least Dracula is trying to get at the core of like the and again, Dracula's not even really. Dracula Untold is probably the most sexless Dracula film I've ever watched, which is kind of crazy. It's weird that they give him kids. I think I should say it's like normally the idea of like the lost love and stuff has like some potential with like vampire fiction. When you throw kids in the mix, it just kind of makes it weird. It's like it's not as interesting anymore. Like if he's daddy Dracula, but like not
sexy not, single dad Dracula.
Yeah, but not in like the daddy Dracula. He's just kind of like boring dad Dracula. But the Mummy, it's not even touched on that. It's just completely devoid of theme or the weight of the material. I'm not in the sense of we've taken it out of its element as a discussion of like how American and British people would just take away things from people's lands and effectively whitewash the stories. No, we just did that. We just whitewashed the Mummy anyway because we're fine to do that. Like that's what I think is the weirdest thing. How are you going to build a fucking dark universe with the Mummy and set it up so fucking Tom Cruise is the Mummy? Like, what the fuck casting is that?
You killed the actual Mummy.
I know.
And you've got like white boy Tom Cruise at the end of the movie with like bandage wraps on his hands, and he's like in Egypt, and he's like, fuck it. I'm just like, are you like really? And it opens with Tom Cruise. He's like in the American military, and his whole thing is that like, he's in the military, and while they're over in the Middle East, he and his buddy, they like fucking go and steal shit from these tombs in like Iraq and stuff, and then sell it on the black market. And I'm like, okay, so like that's like a strong kind of opening start. If you're going to talk about these kind of themes, you're going to have someone who's like actively taking advantage of this situation of being in foreign soil and all this stuff. And then they just fucking like move on. Someone wrote that was a thing that this character did, and then just paid it no mind as they continued the rest of the story.
They want to play it off as that. Maybe they want to play it off as that charming, like 1930s comic booky thing of like Alan Scott finds a mysterious lantern on the railway track. Oh shit! Now he's a superhero. Except they can't even commit to that entirely, which the old Brendan Fraser movie did. Mm-hmm. Just for fun, because I think it's fun for bad movies, I went on Rotten Tomatoes just to look at the reviews. There's one that says, did they make a film that they can be proud of? No. But did they create value for their shareholders? And after that, it should say also no. But I'm really surprised that they thought that anyone got value out of this movie, including their shareholders.
This was the loss of Full End. That's funny. Yeah. Man, I'm curious to see what the Dracula one say because I think that one is just kind of universally accepted as like not the good one, but like
when that's the standard.
It wasn't the Mummy.
The less offensively bad one. I'm looking at stills from Dracula Untold right now, and I'm just now realizing that some of the special effects they use, like where like the skin looks kind of translucent and you can like see the like fangs and shit like during the daytime. I'm just like, why does that look like the special effects from the Nicolas Cage Ghost Rider movie? Like, why is that what I'm thinking of? Like, Jesus.
Wow.
The Nicolas Cage Ghost Rider movie is at least having fun. It's at least memorable.
I agree. I mean, I love that film to death.
The movie is so fucking funny.
But that's something that these films were missing, and at least Dracula Untold has like moments where I'm just like, I believe that there was a level of excitement about what is happening on screen right now.
Yeah.
The Mummy, there's not, and it's funny to me because like, you guys know me. Hi, my name is Matthew, and I like Hack Slash by Tim Seeley. I have no issue with us doing like let's do it. Let's do sexy horror Mummy. Like I'm just like, yeah, I'm all for that. Like if you want to make the Mummy like hot, sexy femme fatale chick, I'm here for it. If you want to do like totally a fucking like this crazy ass like over the top sexy horror exploitation film, like fucking do it, but just commit, damn it. Like this the Mummy herself could have been something cool, but she dies, so she doesn't get to continue on in this imaginary universe that didn't happen. And they never really commit to anything with her character. She's just generically evil because she made a pact with Set, who is not the god of death, and I will die mad about that. But they just commit to something. That's all I asked of the Mummy, and it couldn't be bothered. And it can't even commit to its own plot because we have to take 5 minutes out for Tom Cruise to fight Mr. Hyde out of nowhere, and that. I'm spinning my wheels and just getting angry at the Mummy.
As far as I can tell now, the entire Dark Universe venture has been abandoned, and they've basically just agreed to let Blumhouse make all of these movies from now on. There is a new Dracula movie coming out that has nothing to do with this. Obviously, The Invisible Man came out, but it has nothing to do with the Dark Universe version they came up with. And as much as I didn't like that particular movie, Blumhouse is probably the best people in current horror movie making to be handling these kinds of things anyway. I didn't care for their Halloween reboot either, but at least it was a fucking Halloween movie. At least with those movies, there's a chance to kind of go back to there's a metaphor to the monster, and we're just going to play up the metaphor for a contemporary audience, and we're going to have fun with it. All of the Blumhouse movies, like them or hate them, everyone involved is at least having fun. What's that movie called? Happy Death Day. Happy Death Day is a terrible movie, but that movie is so fucking fun to watch. And
I was just gonna agree with that. I haven't seen it, but just based off the trailers, I was like, this looks like the people are just having the time of their lives making it.
Yeah, that's all I kind of want. The Invisible Man movie that they made, it's a weird one because they do the thing with that's famous with the book, which is it's a metaphor for discrimination, and it's a metaphor for basically being in a situation where you were constantly gaslit. And so the version that they have is a girl who escaped an abusive boyfriend. And then the abusive boyfriend turns out to be fucking Batman or something because he's rich and a tech conglomerate, and he makes a suit that turns him invisible. And he basically just hunts her down. And there are legitimately traumatizing scenes where he's having dinner with her sister, and a knife just comes out of nowhere and slits her sister's throat in broad daylight because he's invisible. And it can get legitimately freaky. The problem with that movie is it tries to be this story about how this is a woman that's been abused, and we need to believe women who talk about sexual violence all the time, and we need to trust them, we need to take their words seriously, which is all true and very fair and what you need to do. But in the context of that movie, everyone is doing the best they can, and she sounds like a crazy woman. And so that's the biggest problem, where it's okay, so you're telling me your abusive ex-boyfriend is also super rich, lives secluded in a mansion, and has an invisible suit that he uses after he came back from the dead to murder everyone you know. Why would you believe her? It doesn't make any sense. That's the biggest problem with that movie, and that's a thing you could clear up in another couple of drafts of writing. But it's competent, it's memorable, it's really well classed, it's really well made, and it's legitimately scary at times. And that's what all of these movies going forward probably need to be.
Yeah.
I think that's the key as well, is these are horror icons. These are horror movies first and foremost. It's MCU brought the superhero. If you're making a superhero franchise, you need to make sure you have fucking superheroes in it. You make a horror movie monster franchise, probably should, have some horror. It's kind of the draw thing. That's why people play, again, games that have blown up as Dead by Daylight. Whole video game about having different horror movie monsters and getting the licenses to the horror monsters, and then you get to have Jason and fucking Leatherface and Michael Myers and fucking Ghostface running around killing people in a multiplayer game. It's blowing up. People love it. People are down to have these characters cross over. People like to have these characters cross over. People make animated parodies. People make videos. People make webcomics and shit. There is a desire for this. There is a big, wealthy fandom. As the horror movie community is so despite how crazy it is, one of the most like normal and like welcoming communities. Like, there's no fucking Star Wars toxicity in the horror movie franchise. It's just they're all into like the effects and like the versions they like and stuff like that. And I think if they appealed to that, if they just made a horror movie franchise where it's just like we're gonna make all these movies like legitimately terrifying, but then the scariest thing of all is all these fuckers are in the same universe and all these fuckers can come at you. And now what happens when all these fuckers come at each other? Or what if you're in a horror movie and you're being fucking chased down by the Wolfman, and then without any warning, you just get fucking Dracula just out of nowhere halfway through the film. Like, what the fuck? Like, that would be nuts. That would be absolutely... You'd never forget that moment. Like, that is one of those things that need to capture on that energy. Is like, the concept is still good. The concept isn't broken, despite how bad these films are. It just takes that level of care, that level of passion that we've talked about, and just don't go so big with it. Just keep it small. Make these things kind of small budget movies. Don't go for the big names. Just make it on the characters, and you'll find the audience. Because again, just look at the new Halloween movies. It's like it's not exactly going for mass public appeal, but it's going for people who like the Halloween films. Just doing more of what they liked. I think that's all you need to do for this. I think that's all you need to do for someone, especially like the Wolfman or the Bride of Frankenstein. People just eat that shit up if you do it properly. If you do it to the letter. If you don't try and, I don't know, not even reinvent the wheel, because that would suggest there was any thought of like care to deconstruct these characters. Just like just fucking get an ounce of passion. Get a director. Because there's going to be a director who would want to make a fucking Dracula film. There's going to be a director who wants to make a fucking Frankenstein film. You're not going to have to search high and low for that. It'd be easy. It'd be many people's dream projects to get them the name out there. Let them go wild with it. Don't spend too much money. Keep it on the back burner. And before you know it, you'll have like a successful franchise. The idea that you need to go so loud and so big and you need to up the scale of the MCU, but without getting too silly. It's like, we don't want to go too crazy. Like, that's the thing, right? If you wanted to up the scale, alright, fine. You want to go the biggest possible thing. Have fucking Castlevania level Dracula who can warp reality. Meet fucking an army of Frankenstein monsters created by like an Eggman style Frankenstein who's just made like legions of armies, and have them fight Cthulhu. Like, go fucking nuts with it if you want to go big. But don't just middle of the road, don't do anything. Just have an idea, have a concept, and it's all it really takes to make these things work. Because again, to circle back to the DCU thing, is I don't like it, but like there is a large, very, very loud fandom for the Zack Snyder DC films, because the dude does have a specific take he has, as batshit as it is he clearly has passion for his take to the point where he's making an extra cut of his movie that he wanted, and his fan base is helping get the noise for that. It's like, if there were people who it's just a lesson, I think, for like studio executives, like, just let creative people be creative, and you're gonna find an audience, because if it speaks to one person, it's gonna end up speaking to a couple of people, and if you get lucky, it could speak to loads of people. So yeah, that's my spiel. It just annoys me. It just annoys me when I see properties like this, which have such potential and such creative free reign, just get like treated as if they are like, oh yeah, Dracula, he's on cereal boxes, we'll treat him like whatever. So it's like, no, have some fucking respect. Like, come on, it's Dracula. We should have a little bit of things on him. So I don't know. It's annoying to me. And these films,
I mean, the Conjuring universe has a dedicated fan base.
Exactly,
and it's
right?
It's basically trying to do this. It's doing exactly that. It's like taking all these horror things and like, it's really fucking scary that all these different horrifying things all happen in the same universe. The Conjuring universe, and obviously, American Horror Story is just one show, but every season is different characters and stuff. But even that show has that shared universe element. So it's like there are things out there that are doing this. They're not going to be MCU levels of successful. And by trying to force your thing that really shouldn't be an MCU style thing to be an MCU style thing, you're missing out on what could make it unique and just trying to force something that's never gonna click.
I think a good sort of point of reference for that too is you look at The Mummy, and The Mummy is $100 to $200 million budget film that barely made that back at the box office. And the thing with horror movies is they can be made on very low budgets and expect heavy rates of return, which is why we do them all the time. I mean, Paranormal Activity is, I think, still the most profitable movie of all time because it was made on like $15,000, if that, and made like hundreds of millions. Halloween was made on $300,000, and with all of these, even like new revivals and reboots and stuff, like Halloween 2018, that's a $10 million movie, and it made $200 million. It made the entire budget of the Mummy movie on a fraction of it. I think at least the first It movie has a similar budget. The second one's a little bit more, but the first It movie made a similar budget to that, and it made $100 million. Like, horror movies aren't generally in the ballpark of $100 million, but even when they get there, they're on budgets of like 5 to 10. A good, successful horror movie franchise like Halloween never makes money anywhere near like $200 million like the new one did. They just got really, really lucky, to be completely honest with how that worked. But you mentioned The Conjuring, and the Conjuring universe has got a lot of movies now, and all of their budgets are relatively low too. They're all anywhere from like 9 million to like 30 million tops, and they all make anywhere from like 500 million, or not 500, 50 million to like 100 million at the box office. The Conjuring 2, which is probably the best movie in that franchise, only made $100 million in its entire run, but it was a budget of like 10 or 20, something like that. Like, you're supposed to aim small scale, and you can still get a really, really high rate of return on that small scale, and that's what allows you to keep these things going. The entire collective budgets, I'm pulling this up on Wikipedia now, the collective budget for every movie in the Conjuring universe, which is 7 movies. 7 movies is less than the budget of one of these movies.
Mm-hmm.
That's fucking insane.
Yeah.
That's legitimately nuts. Like, that is such a stupid move. Like, that's such a stupid fucking move. If you made like 7 Dracula films on that amount of money, you'd fucking crush The Conjuring just in terms of. That's so stupid, though. Like, I can't get over. That's so stupid.
The budget of The Mummy.
Yeah.
That's so fucking dumb, though.
Especially when you have a character like Dracula who, like we talked about in the vampire episode, part of the horror is that he can just blend into society. He can just be a normal person. So if you treat it almost like, like they treated the Twilight Zone back in the day, most of your budget is going to the writing and the acting, and that's really where you're really selling this, and it's this sort of horrifying thing, but you're not going for spectacle necessarily, especially not with Dracula. I mean, obviously, when you do the Wolfman, you maybe bring a little bit more of that in, but like, it's so weird that that's the direction they took it in for Dracula Untold. That just so heavily misses the point.
Man, I really want my fucking art house, fucking grimy as fuck, low budget Dr. Frankenstein series of movies where he just fucking chops people up and makes monsters. Like, holy shit, that would been so good!
Does anyone have a pitch for how they would make a Universal Monster franchise now?
Yeah, I do. But do you guys have one that we can go round robin, or I can just go and then see where?
I've definitely got one.
I mean, mine's short and sweet. I would just copy White Wolf Publishing's World of Darkness and just fucking do that. I would basically make Vampire the Masquerade and Werewolf the Apocalypse fan fiction with the serial numbers filed off, and I am not ashamed to admit that. That is what I would make, because that so perfectly does nail this. It's grimy, it's grungy, it's low budget because most of the really supernatural stuff happens in very small scales. there are very small conflicts that happen all over the world, and all these creatures exist in this universe. And it nails everything I would want to see from this. It's got the body horror, but it's also got the horror of humanity and the horror of all these different things. So I'd straight up I would make a World of Darkness film with the serial numbers filed off. Is how I would fucking do this.
For me, I had like a couple ideas. Like legitimately, the more I think of it, I'm just like, man, that fucking Cthulhu final boss for like the Dracula Avengers. Not gonna lie, would be fucking sick. It's just like Wolfman turns to Frankenstein. It's like Frankenstein, smash. And we're gonna need to get angry, and then Frankenstein turns around. It's like, that's my secret, Wolfman. Frankenstein was the name of the doctor.
Then he punches Dagon.
Yeah, he punches him dead in the face. But like, my serious pitch would be like, the movie Trick or Treat?
Yes.
Yeah.
I fucking love that movie.
The best thing Bryan Singer's fucking done.
So I'd just be like, just do those, but in all the different anthologies are a different universal horror movie monster, and like it's all one movie, which would be like the Dark Universe 1 and Dark Universe 2 and Dark Universe 3. But like one of them's a Dracula story, one of them's a Wolfman story, one of them's a Frankenstein story, one of them. So you don't have to even do whole films of these fuckers. Just let it be effectively a testing ground where writers can come in and just write, I've got this really fucking solid ass Dracula one shot that no one's ever seen this take on the character before. I've got this really great take on the Wolfman, like this introspect. You just let different, like I don't always do it like a different director does a different the different scenes. It's like it's all one film, but like each segment is filmed by a different director, and you just pump those fuckers out every 2 years or a year or so, and you just make it so these characters individually with these kind of out there takes or whatever, people like free reign might not sell, but the fact that you get to basically get the bargained in equivalent of a horror movie, where you get to have like basically 5 horror movies in one, and they're just like great chance to get talented people, bring in directors who are like really well known. Like, what the fuck when Rian Johnson comes on for just a fucking Frankenstein short that just blows up, and people are like, wow, that's fucking crazy, and it's like 10 minutes, and then you do someone fucking like you bring in a couple of big names, you bring in a couple of low names, you just make it like a really healthy ground for talent to work with each other, to find new actors, to let experienced actors play characters in a way that they may not be normal in studio conceits, and you just make sure it's low budget enough that you don't have to worry about too much with executives. Make it clear for everyone involved that this is just kind of a fun passion thing that people can come in and ask to do. Make it like, you know how everyone was like, I really want to get cameo on The Simpsons. Make it so everyone's like, I really want to direct a Dark Universe short. Make it so people are asking to join you, and you make it just a fucking annual thing and just keep going. And it would be the coolest thing of all time.
That'd be right.
What you got, Steve?
So Addams Family, basically. That's the ultimate Dark Universe if you think about it.
Pretty much. It's the horniest one for sure.
But no, so my thing's always been that like half of these characters come from a very specific point in history, which is those 19th century Gothic stories. That's where Dracula comes from. That's where Frankenstein comes from. It's where Jekyll and Hyde come from. And then when you move into some of the other ones that are like movie exclusive stuff, like Creature from the Black Lagoon and the Wolfman, they still pull like really heavily from those older stories, and you could imagine them being sort of 19th century Gothic tales. I would do like a Netflix style series where every episode is a kind of movie. And so the first one would be Dracula, because Dracula obviously has to be first. And then you do Frankenstein, and you basically just like straight up adapt Frankenstein, except you add to the context of Frankenstein that Dracula exists. And so like Frankenstein in the book, Frankenstein's monster, he's really well read, and he's really smart, and he's really empathetic, and he goes around trying to like live a life. And you could add a scene to that where in his travels he runs into fucking Dracula, and Dracula can't like drink his blood and kill him, and Frankenstein has no interest in killing Dracula because Frankenstein just doesn't give a shit about that. And you have like this like philosophical conversation between these two guys who've been around for so long and didn't ask to be born in this way, and they kind of just like bond over it and go their own separate ways. And then you can do the same sort of paralleling thing between the Wolfman and Jekyll and Hyde, where the Wolfman's like, I didn't ask to be this sort of way, and then Jekyll and Hyde are like, but we did, and we really regret it, and then but we also kind of love it. And you just turn it into this like really melodramatic, almost soapy, super gothic, old school horror thing, where it's all just like character study based, and it's not even necessarily like a slasher movie or a horror movie meant to terrify you. It's meant to be like this psychological thriller that's back in the 19th century still, and you give them a bigger budget, but it's all entirely for like the set dressing, like Penny Dreadful but good.
You know, the cool thing about that as well is like, because of the conceit of the characters, and like say you start off with Dracula, so Dracula becomes the central character, and then Frankenstein becomes like your dual protagonist. Like those two are your two boys that you're following for others. You can just have that like start at like their origins, but like by the time you get to season 3, you can be like in the 1960s. Like you can just keep it aging, because the cool thing about that is not only do you get to have the immortal characters stick around, but people like the Wolfman who aren't, you can then go through different generations of different people who have that affliction and how they react to it differently. So you get like the legacy characters and shit like that. So you'll keep Dracula and Frankenstein's monster as like your two POV characters, and then see how the rest of this horrifying world is created and how people react over time. And with each season, oh man, fucking writes itself. That's so good.
Well, and all of these characters, whether intentional or not, have this like lingering existential question in all of their original works, which is, why was I born? Why was I created if I could not be promised happiness? Frankenstein's whole thing is, how dare you give me life and not ensure me a way to like deal with that? The Wolfman's a really similar thing, where it's like, to be human is to be this savage thing that I can't control, and that's not fair. And then Jekyll and Hyde is again exactly the same thing, where it's like, being human isn't enough. Oh shit, I am too human now, and I don't know what to do with it. And you could literally just have them all go through these existential crises, and then they just meet fucking Dracula, who's been around for hundreds of years, and he's like this godfather character who's like, okay, let me sit you down and let me explain to you what the meaning of life actually is, from someone that's been around for centuries and has enough opportunity to figure it out. And you get like some really tragic stories where like the Wolfman ends up dying, but you have other ones like Jekyll and Hyde where like he sort of like learns to make peace with the inner monster, and it becomes like this deeper metaphor for what existence is. Like you could just lean so hard into the gothic metaphor pretentious shit. I would kill for that.
In short,
and then Drakenstein is when they have to fuse together to fight Cthulhu.
Yes!
When they have to do the fusion dance, and they become Drakenstein.
That's so good. Like, and he's got the,
I mean,
the fangs become like the bolts.
If you're gonna say like, you know what, no, fuck it, we're gonna do Ride or Die, and we're gonna make this an MCU thing. Like, Cthulhu is your Thanos. Absolutely, you're right about that. I mean, that unknowable cosmic evil, that's definitely your your big thing that you build up to, if you were going to, because again, I think anything is possible, anything is doable with the right idea, with the right, you could turn this into an MCU style superhero thing. I just think you would have to approach it with you'd have to have such a confidence in what you were doing, and you would have to come at it with such a specific tone and such a specific take and an idea that it'd definitely be doable. It'd just be kind of fucking hard.
Can you just imagine a movie with Luke Evans, Russell Crowe, and Tom Cruise, where like Tom Cruise is like, "What is this?" and Russell Crowe just like looks up really dramatically at the camera and he's like, "It's the Call of Cthulhu." And that's your fucking movie.
Yo, let's go. god! Like, as if I wouldn't be
In
that
conclusion,
open fucking day.
In conclusion, have fun with your movies when you make them. Jesus
Yeah.
Christ.
Alright, this is the one question I have to ask you guys before we wrap out. If that's your fucking trio, who do you cast as Cthulhu?
Nicolas Cage.
Nick, yeah, Steve's a genius.
I don't know. Fucking, well, you get Andy Serkis to do the mocap, obviously,
Of course.
right?
Yeah.
That goes without saying. I mean, yeah, I can't. You guys have played KOTOR 2, right?
Yeah.
Cthulhu is just Darth Nihilus. He talks and just nonsense comes out that hurts you.
So Nicolas Cage.
Yeah, exactly. He's Nicolas Cage, and when he talks, it's just Nicolas Cage going like, and
just
you feel
imagine him
pain.
taking off Darth Nihilus's mask and it's Nicolas Cage's face underneath. That's completely recontextualized that entire game. Oh, okay. This is getting silly now. This is silly
You gotta
people.
play
But
it like Smallville though, where he's just Nicolas Cage most of the time, and Cthulhu is like this smoky presence that takes over him from time to time.
yeah, it's like he transforms into Cthulhu because you want to have those you want to have like the Dark Knight like interrogation scene with Dracula and Cthulhu, which legit could be fucking sick because Dracula this entire like this is no, but like this entire time Dracula's been like the Godfather character, like it's like Ian fucking Steve's pitch went through, right? And he's just the Godfather character. He's the guy who knows everything. And then Cthulhu just comes in. It's just like, hello, baby. He's like you young one, you little insignificant. And completely shatters his fucking worldview because this whole time we've hoped with Dracula was like, he's the older, he was the first supernatural, and Cthulhu's just like, no. Let's rewind the clock a little bit. And it's just like, no. And now Dracula's the one who's all broken, having gothic crises. And then all the other monsters have to, like, they've been healed by Dracula, so now they have to get him back up. Oh, man, this is too good to be wasted on these fucking studio execs who fucking don't know how to write shit. Oh, man.
And I would just straight up steal Grant Morrison and Tom King's thing, and it would just be like, Cthulhu is.
Oh, yeah.
Let's do it. Oh, man.
Dracula lives and dies, but Cthulhu is.
That's how you fucking do it. I mean, because, like, when you read Mr. Miracle and it just interrupts the book for those dark side is, how do you fucking not do a Cthulhu movie where you just fucking, like, the movie itself just fucking trips you out and you have to, like, you're watching the characters deal with it, but then you're also dealing with the movie itself fighting against the well, now we're getting away from it. But that'd be, it'd be cool.
Yeah, it'd be cool.
Why weren't we paid for this?
We will never be. They're gonna keep us down, man. It's the fucking man. It's gonna keep us holding up. But yeah, the horror.
This is why I'm so depressed all the time. I should be making all the movies.
Exactly. You're a hidden talent just waiting to burst. That's where it needs to go, Steve. But yeah, the Halloween that ends on a very scary note. The idea that we could have made better films is probably the most scariest demon of them all. Yeah, that probably ends our Ghoulie Gentleman. That ends our Dark Universe. We can't really do recommendations for this one. Just watch the good versions of the Mummy and Dracula. There's plenty of them. But other than that, I do have an announcement that we will be moving into Geeky Gentleman a History Month next week. Well, whenever this gets posted. And we'll be welcoming the original Cthulhu of us all, the original Geeky Gentleman, Sid Part 2, back to the channel. He'll be helping out as much as he can, depending on scheduling and stuff, but he'll be returning as regular as he can be. And as a result of that, he has picked the topic for next week's video. And that is going to be a doozy for History Month, and that is this current election.
Oh, man.
Oh, we'll have the answer by that point, too.
Yep.
Oh, no.
Oh, yeah. I mean, don't shoot the messenger. That's
Alright, well, thank you everyone for watching Geeky Gentleman. Jesus.
I won't be sober for that one. I might just sleep, honestly. We'll see.
But for our last time, in the spirit of this awesome Halloween horror pitch to lighten the mood, we have been your ghoulie gentlemen. And I have been a ghoul for fun.
That spooky kid.
And I'm Steve.
Spooky enough.
And we will be pitching the movies you wish you got instead. Ba-dee-dee-dee-dee.